I just feel like we living in this time, you know, it's really, really difficult for people to just be real. Making sure that when we are talking about what we're about and we're talking about who we are, like, let's make sure we're telling the whole story.
Like, what's the true self, right? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
does that mean? I found personally, from my personal experience, that one of the best ways to find out who the true self is asking yourself. It's really
Facts.
asking yourself, because nobody else can tell you. For real, for real. Like, there's other people might have some ideas or go based off the behavior that they've observed, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the best ways to really figure out who you are is to really sit down with yourself and asking yourself, okay, who am I? Like, what are the things that what I do? What are the things that I think about? What are the things that I want? And really just and being truly honest with yourself and having the mentality that, hey, if I'm writing this down, I'm not sharing this with anyone. This is truly for me. And after
Right.
you do, you're like, oh, like you become really comfortable with it. It's just words, and it's yourself, so you can embrace it. But that acceptance, I feel like after you start accepting who you are, I think the next steps is really gaining that clarity on who you are. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that I would like to bring up values with you and see how that shapes your perception of the authentic self. For me,
Yeah.
whenever I see someone who's having a hard time kind of figuring out who they are, where they want to go, what they want to be, and anything like that, I usually one of my main questions to ask is like, what are your values? What are the things that you value? And I've noticed that a lot of people, especially people in their 20s, they're not really asking themselves that question.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that they're really taking the time to do that inner work and sit down and like, really, okay, so I value the environment, I value honesty, I value friendship, I value leadership, whatever it might be. I have a massive list personally. And it changes all the time. Just want to run further. It changes all the
Fair.
time.
Which is
Um,
fair.
yeah, and yeah, that's okay. But in your perspective and in your experience, how has values been a part of really uncovering the true self and the authentic self?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I can tell you for me, at the top of my list, and I think it'll always be at the top of my list, is I value great communication.
Mm,
That's not only as a therapist, as a father, as somebody who wants, you know, to be married one day. I think about all these different intricate ways that if you have great communication, it's so much easier to, for me, number one, build good relationships with people. A very extremely important thing I think most people would like, being understood by others. I think that's why we communicate in the first place. And then understanding people at the same time. I think it allows us to live the type of life truly that we want for our future. So for me, one thing I will kind of bring up too, when I think about a lot of family building, when I think about parenting, when I think about the parent-child dynamic, to me, a foundation of that is allowing, for example, your child to be who they really are. But in order to do that, I as a parent have to give them the space to breathe and to go on their own journey discovering who they are, not minimizing and shutting them down as they're maybe bumping their head or as they're starting to make some discovery, right? So that's one bucket. Relationships. If I don't know who I am and what I want and what I value, and then it's very hard, I would say probably impossible, to articulate that to another person that I want to ride on this journey with me, right? If I asked you, let's do a quick example. If I asked you, Carlos, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Do you want to be married one day?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think that you need? Give me like maybe your top three, if you can. What do you think are maybe the top three things you need from your wife in order to feel like you're gonna be, you might have a successful relationship?
For sure. Open honesty, for sure. Definitely trust, and I would definitely say exploration. That would be the main things like that. That's priorities for me. For sure.
Okay. Now, why does that matter? Thank you for sharing that. Why does that matter? Because if I'm sitting down across from you, right, and we're on a date, and somebody's like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Like, if you don't have that answer back there, number one, they're probably not taking you that very seriously, because they're like, well, you don't even understand what you're looking for. So I don't even know why you're sitting here. You know, you're clearly just figuring it out, and that's fine. Just like we're all figuring out who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But when you want to go on these journeys with folks, you need to understand who you are and what you want. So again, that's why communication is important to me. And then on the side note, going back to what I was saying about when we're trying to give people the space to figure out who they are. And I'm going to try my very, very best to not go on a soapbox here, but I feel like, I just feel like we living in this time, it's really, really difficult for people to just be real. Mm-hmm. We have this space where, especially again on online platforms, I think where people feel like they must portray a certain image that is attractive or appealing to the eye for men, women, children, whoever, but it's not necessarily telling the whole story, which we've touched on this before, and I posted clips about it this week, touching just on that. Making sure that when we are talking about what we're about and we're talking about who we are, like, let's make sure we're telling the whole story. So in order to tell the story, I got to know who I am. I got to know what I'm about. I think, to me, again, that's why communication is so valuable, because it touches every facet of our existence while we're here. Because our existence is not just us observing every single thing that we go through. It's sharing it back, right? Whether it's on a platform like this, whether it's on a podcast, whether it's making clips, whether it's going live, the purpose is we value as humans connection, and that connection is through communication, typically verbal, right? That's what I value. I know that I value that. I've learned throughout my life on my journey to self-discovery that I need that. I need that. I think I've had relationships not work because I didn't recognize how important that was to me and I wasn't getting it. And then it caused things to unfold poorly. I've learned over the course of parenting so far that I value that, and I want my son to always feel open to communicate with me. I value that with my clients. I want them to never be afraid. And in that specific sphere, in mental health, I will say even more so it's paramount to be your authentic self, and for us to give a client that space. Because the person is largely, a lot of times, going through that experience with you if you're the provider, if you're the clinician. And they're already second guessing themselves. They're already afraid.
Right.
They're like, if I say this, I don't know if he's gonna say I can't work with you anymore, or I don't subscribe to this. I'm like, listen, you can do whatever you want. Even if I disagree, I'm still gonna go on this journey with you, right? Because you're allowed the space and the freedom to learn how you see yourself, how you feel about certain things. I'm not gonna be another person to shut you down. And for a lot of brothers and sisters out there in these different spaces, going through their own experiences, I just think it's really important that I hope that I'm communicating this clearly. I want us to give people the space to make mistakes and grow and evolve, and stop shutting each other down while we're trying to figure out who we are, just because we bump our heads or we slip. That's gonna happen, especially talking about in your 20s. It's absolutely gonna happen. But let's not demonize each other because of that. Let's allow each other, okay, let's get some grace here. You made a mistake. I'm gonna challenge you. You made a mistake. But I'm gonna give you information that maybe you can go back and you can take some time and try to digest, and maybe you'll be different for in the future. Instead of, in your example, Carlos, I'm attacking you, and what did you say? I had to get defensive. That's what people do.